I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Napa Valley Special Series 2023. Across these 5 episodes, we'll be exploring the Napa Valley scene through the lens of 5 very different wineries, giving us an incredibly detailed and up-to-date snapshot of this fascinating region via its people, land, and winemaking. Make sure you subscribe to Interpreting Wine wherever you're listening so you don't miss an episode. We continue the series today in the company of Ray Signorello of Signorello Estate. We hear Ray's origin story before he introduces us to the people at the estate. We then talk estate philosophy, Napa Valley culture. Ray gives us the Signorello Estate virtual tour, talks production facilities. We get a trim wine range deep dive, talk labeling transparency, before discussing the premier Napa auction and what it's like to chair the event. Enjoy.
Our story really started, I guess, with my family being Italian, coming over from Italy in about 1904 and ended up in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So my father was born in San Francisco as I was. And when I was very young, my father moved the family to Vancouver, Canada. Not a wine growing region, but his background was in natural resource, oil and gas mining. Mm-hmm. So he took his family to Vancouver. So I grew up in Vancouver, went to business school up there, and then ended up back in San Francisco in the 80s. And that's kind of where this whole winery thing started for us. So we had no family history in the wine business. We, I was going to Wall Street, to be honest with you. That was my career path, and I fully intended to move to New York. Unfortunately, the crash of Wall Street in 1987 really changed my path, and that there was really no job career there for me at the time. So I ended up in San Francisco in commercial real estate. A friend of my father's owned a piece of property in Napa Valley that he bought in the 60s, and he lived in Las Vegas. He had no background in the wine or vineyard business, but he was into horse racing. That was his hobby. And when the horses got too old to win anything, he put them out to pasture on this property that he bought back in the 60s on the Silverado Trail. So that eventually became ours, and that my father fell in love with that piece of property and said to himself and to my mother, who was also born in the United States in Seattle, that they would one day retire from Vancouver and move back to California. So he kind of viewed this as his retirement plan and made a deal with his partner, bought the property, which was virgin ground, never had a vine on it, no winemaking, bought that in 1977. And started by growing grapes. So the first thing we did was hired a vineyard manager who went out and planted the vineyard, and we started selling grapes to people like Cake Bread and Camus and some others. And, that's kind of an easier part of the business, if you will. You can hire somebody to plant the vineyard and grow the grapes and sell the grapes, and it's a lot less involved than, let's say, making wine. So that got us started. So that was 1980. Started selling grapes to those folks. And then in 1985, we made that decision to, hey, these people really like our grapes. Maybe we should try making a little wine ourselves. Yeah. Now, it sounds like a no-brainer, a good story. But to be honest with you, I've never made wine before. And you live in Canada now. I mean, I was in business school up there. My father was up there, living there. I mean, it's a huge task. I mean, and a steep learning curve. And so 1985, we had the wine custom crushed, the grapes custom crushed, which means that you take the grapes to another winery and they make it for you. And a couple of years later, it came to market in 87. And, it was just, a steep learning curve. It was just not an easy task. And just kind of coincidentally, I was coming out of school and ended up in California. And I kind of took it on and said, hey, okay, I'm the only family member here. I had no intention of being in the wine business, but, I took it on, and to be honest, I fell in love with the business within a year or two, fell in love with it. Our wines were recognized fairly early by some of the top critics like Robert Parker, and we had a really good launch into the wine business. And that was in the 80s, and fast forward to now, so that's 35 years later. Doesn't seem like that, but 35 years goes by pretty quickly. And along the way, I created some other businesses in the industry. I started 3 other wine projects: Edge Wines and Trim Wines and S by Signorello. So I've got 4 different winery projects, and actually I distribute wines in Canada as well. So I kind of diversified my businesses, but the core thrust, if you will, is Signorello Estate. And, again, it's been an interesting march over the years, because a lot of people maybe have grown up in this industry, and that's not what I did, but I fell in love with it at 25 years old, and I'm a few months shy of 60, and it's been a great kind of run, not without its challenges, though. And I mentioned before we started here about the fires and whatnot, and that really kind of changed a path for us as well.
Yeah, well, I've got to say, in spite of everything, you're looking well on it. As you say, you're near 60. But I think, and obviously, I think it would be very interesting for me, and I think, hopefully interesting for the listeners as well, to explore that. I mean, as you say, you did sort of, mention that, that there's a different phase that you're in as a winery compared to maybe some of the other guests that are going to come on through the series. But what I then, I guess, kind of, and maybe it will kind of bleed into that quite naturally, is really to kind of introduce some of the protagonists, really. That obviously, we can't bring everybody that's on the ground there and part of the story. But I did ask you to just sort of, draw out who might be some of the key people on a sort of a day-to-day basis that are involved in the winemaking and in the vineyard work there.
Sure.
Across those different projects, I'm guessing.
Yeah. So I just mentioned, in October of 17 now, we lost our winery to the wildfires in Napa Valley, and really kind of got put back to square one almost in a lot of respects. But I looked at that as an opportunity. I said to myself, hey, this has happened, but I'm going to make this an opportunity. We're going to come out of the other end better than we went in. So, you have 3 things essentially in the wine business. You've got vineyards, winemaking facilities, and people. And we lost our vineyard, not our vineyard, but we lost our winemaking facilities. Our vineyard, we lost very little. We were very fortunate because our vines are between 30 somewhat and 40 somewhat years old. So very little of that was lost. And that was really fortunate for us. A very, very fortunate situation to have the vineyards, because those, I think about the vine age, and, for us, as the vines got older, the fruit got better and we made better wine. So, the other side of it was the people. So I took an opportunity I looked at the opportunity to make some adjustments there. So I brought in what I consider some of the best people in my industry. I brought in Priyanka French, who's our full charge winemaker. She came over from Napa Valley Winery, arguably one of the top wineries in Napa Valley. I brought in Steve Mathiasen, who's a very well-respected and very famous individual in our area, to really help us with our vineyard side. I mean, he's a winemaker as well and has his own winery, but he's one of the vineyard gurus of our area, and I brought him in to really help us take our vineyards and really fine-tune them to get the best fruit that we could from them. Precision viticulture is kind of the best word I could use for that. And then I brought in Celia Welsh, again, one of the absolute top people in my business, to work on the winemaking side with Priyanka. And she's been in the industry a long time and made some very famous wines herself. So I brought in those 3 people to really help me create Signorello Part 2. And We're very fortunate. We've got these old vines, which we're going to have a brand new winery, which will be done around November of this year, of 2023. It's taken me 5+ years to do that. It's a very slow process, but we're going to have probably the newest winery and some of the oldest vines in Napa, with just a wonderful winemaking and vineyard team behind it. So to me, that's the excitement that I'm getting. And, the goal is to build a winery that for the ages. I own it personally, and I'm hoping that my 2 young daughters, which are currently 9 and 11 years old, very young, are going to one day take this over and run with it, because it's just a wonderful piece of property on the Silverado Trail in southeastern part of Napa Valley.
Amazing. And I think, where there's obviously, loads to talk about there. It is, it's a huge event in the history and in the present, really, isn't it, of the business and the people, as you say, and has brought about a huge change. But I'm curious, Ray, to maybe dive into what might be some of the differences, really, that I guess it occurred over that time, in kind of almost from an operational point of view, because I always like to talk about the winemaking culture, because presumably then at that time, the severity of the wildfires meant that there were multiple wineries that were affected. It was and I get the sense that it kind of affects your neighbor as well. Those things kind of happening to you. I'm just curious how that affected your production in relation to your neighbors in a sense, first of all, and then also what are some of the changes, personnel and winemaking, that we might notice outside when we see bottles or when we taste bottles.
Right. Well, wildfires are a tricky thing and very interesting animal in their own right, in that my winery burned down and my next door neighbors did not. I mean, it's that night there was 50-mile-an-hour winds, and just the angle of attack and whatnot created a winery loss for me and not necessarily for my neighbors, which is good news for them, obviously. And it's not been just 1 year. So in 2020, I mean, there's many wineries lost that way, and not just in Napa, but all over the world. We're dealing with different things that have happened. So I think the fortunate thing, to reiterate what I said earlier, is the vineyards were not affected. So we have that, and that's ultimately where things really happen. I mean, it's all about the vineyards, and as much as I talked about our winemaking team and vineyard team, that's important, but ultimately it's the vineyard site. And if you look to Europe and Chateau Latour and all these famous Bordeaux houses, I mean, they've been making wines for hundreds of years with many different winemakers and even owners in many cases. Yeah. And they still make world-class top-end wine. So, to me, it is about the site and trying to nurture that site. And, our style, if you will, is very much about trying to be transparent to the site. And by that, I mean, the vagaries of the vintage show up every year. We're not trying to override that. We're trying to make wines that are elegant, complex, and age-worthy. There's different things that have happened in the wine industry over the years. There's been different fads and different, ripe wines and sweet wines, and a lot, have come out over the years from different regions. And, I've really tried to resist that and kind of look to the wines of the old world in a lot of respects to give me the foresight of how to run my facility, my winery, and stay the course and not try to kind of move just to the current day's kind of wishes.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think hearing I guess that tenure, really, that 1977 purchasing the block. I mean, I'm sure it was a different world back then, and almost unthinkable that it wasn't in vines, or that it hadn't been put into vines previously. When we think about the impact and the name Napa out there in the marketplace, and something that I'm learning as I put this series together really is that idea of what it's been like, that emergence really, because there's obviously been certain events that have taken place on in the last sort of 50, 60 years that have really catapulted that name into everybody's consciousness. And I'm just curious, kind of almost, as part of the culture of your business there, what does that sort of bring to mind when I talk about, key cultural influences in Napa Valley and in the evolution of Napa Valley?
Well, I mean, Napa is really, as you mentioned earlier, when we got our start in the 70s, Napa was not what it is today. Our area was not well planted even. We're in the southeastern part of the Napa Valley on the trail, and there's a lot of open ground there. Our property had never been planted in the history of that property. So, yeah, I mean, there's been, if you look at Napa today, there's a lot more in the way of plantings. It's almost fully planted. You've got, even restaurants. I mean, there's that whole side of it, the whole destination travel part of Napa Valley. It's become a very popular place for people to travel. And, it's hard to argue that it's not probably North America's top region. Bordeaux varietals, Cabernet Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec are kind of the top focused varietals, if you will. I think we've kind of made that statement over the years that we're really, I mean, we do grow other things and do them well, but I think the Cabernet based wines are probably the de rigueur here for Napa Valley. And I think, there's so many more players involved. There's hundreds. I mean, there's probably close to 1,000 wineries in Napa, and all these different people trying to do their best, I think, has really created the quality out of Napa. So, there's a lot more competition. When we started, there's probably 100 wineries. Now there's close to 1,000. And the competition has created different wines, different styles, but also across the board better wines. And albeit in some in very small quantities. A lot of people think they know Napa, but I live in Napa and I make wine there. I've been doing it a long time. And I don't know all of it, nowhere close to all of it. It's amazing that there's so much diversity there, and that is something hard to wrap your head around. And even Napa, I mean, our neighbor next door is Sonoma, and Sonoma's got a whole new bunch of wineries and vineyards and whatnot. So, there's so much to learn and so much to know, and that's just two places I just mentioned. It's the whole world to know. So. It's exciting, though, I think, for us in Napa. I mean, again, it's not been just a bunch of roses there. I mean, we've dealt with the climate issues and the fires and drought and, the water issues. So there's been a lot of issues. But, I mean, it's a pretty tough breed here in Napa, and we work hard at every year, and it's never easy. But that's to me what it's all about. It's actually I thrive on that change and dealing with it. If it was easy and the same every year, it probably wouldn't be as much fun for me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I love it. And that for me is really the heart of a winemaking community, is an agricultural community, and that kind of, made of tougher stuff. And, and I find that no matter who I speak to, be it in Australia, in California, in New York, indeed, as I recently interviewed a number of winemakers in New York State. It's all known for wines, but and I think in Napa, as you say, very much known for its enotourism and tourism. But I feel like when you speak to the people, you don't have to scratch very far to actually get through to that base of the agricultural and farming communities, basically, because as you say, everything comes from the soil and everything comes from the fruit. And I think that that's really where I would encourage you to go a little deeper, because you've already introduced those 4 different ranges that you oversee and that you kind of putting out there into the world. So I wonder, I think, through those different ranges, it would be great to, start to orientate us to, where is the kind of fruit coming from for those different ranges, and also, a sense of, where in the valley you are, and what that maybe gives to each different site, and subsequently to each different range.
Sure. Signorello is kind of where it all started, and Signorello Estate is a single vineyard estate, which is somewhat unique in our area. It follows more the model of a Bordeaux house, in that the vineyard is it's contiguous vineyard with a winery right, kind of in the middle of it all. So the grapes really only travel a few hundred feet from vineyard to winery. Wow. So that's kind of the core, the mothership. That's what I've been doing the longest. It's the top end wines, single vineyard, old vine Cabernet, and I do a single old vine Chardonnay. So 2 wines from the estate. And I named them after my parents. Both are not with me anymore, but this is a way to keep their memory alive in a lot of respects. And the Chardonnay is called Hope's Cuvée. It's a single vineyard old vine Chard. My mother was Hope Signorello, so we only make a small amount of that. It's typically 400 to 500 cases a year. And then the Cabernet that we do is called Padrone, which Italian term meaning the head of the family. And this is a Bordeaux blend, Cabernet, Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, Malbec, depending on the vintage, and but mostly Cab. And that was a tribute to my father. So those are the 2 wines really that are the focus of Signorello Estate. And then as I mentioned, I started these other projects. So back in 2001, I created a wine called Edge, and it's a Cabernet single. We only make 1 wine in that company, and it's made from vineyards in the Alexander Valley in Sonoma, so a valley next door to us in Napa. We kind of feel it's the second best growing region for Cabernet in California. It's a great area to grow Cabernet. It gives you a very kind of delineated, maybe not as big and bold as Napa, but delineated, focused Cabernet. And so we started that back in 2001. And, the idea here was to offer a really good quality, the quality of my team and my know-how without that kind of price point. So using kind of American prices is, Signorello is $200 and some odd dollar plus Cabernet Padrone, and the Chardonnay is about $100, where the Edge project is more in the $25 price range. So we're trying to offer something that, I get it. I mean, I drink lots of wine, and I'm not drinking $200 bottles every night. So, but there's no excuse not to have a good quality wine in the 20s. So I said I want to do that, and that's how Edge started. And then I started another wine called Trim, and the idea behind that, it came out of back in 2009, that when we had it was really 2008, the collapse of the world economy, and it really lent itself to a new wine from us. I said, I'm going to create a new wine, Trim the Cost. That's how the name came about. And it is more in the $12 to $13 price point, and it is sourced. We put a California appellation on the label, but it's sourced from the Cabernet from Lodi and the Chardonnay from Sonoma, Russian River, and just really good quality wines. That a lot of wines at that price point tend to be full of sugar, and using concentrates and stuff we call mega purple out there and stuff. And I said, hey, I'm not going to do that. I want to make a real authentic $12 to $14 Chardonnay and Cabernet that I can drink. So that was the mandate. If I'm not going to be interested in drinking it, then I'm not making it. And so that's how the Trim started and continues. And then my newest project, which is a product of the fires and my new winemaking team, I kind of went to them and said, hey, let's create a new project. Let's come out of this with something new and fun. And what they did is they created a wine called S, my initial S. And it's not a Signorello Estate. It's a different wine project, and it's sourced from some different vineyards. So I've been making Cabernet from my single vineyard on the Silverado Trail for 30 some odd years, cooler part of Napa.
Yeah.
But there's some other great regions in Napa. The mandate was to Priyanka, you go find what you think are some really cool regions that you want to make some wine from. And that turned into Rutherford, St. Helena, Oakville, and Howell Mountain. And so we went to those areas, sourced grapes, made some wine, and that's called S. And then the final mandate on that is I wanted to offer a really good pedigree team, good pedigree vineyards without the real big pedigree price tag. So in American dollar terms, it's more like $75, which for Napa high-end wine is very reasonable these days. So that's the 4 projects, and that's probably what we're going to stick with. I mean, that's really what we do. Mostly Cabernet, although I do make a tiny amount of Chardonnay at the very high end with Signorello and the very lower end with Trim.
Amazing. And in terms of just trying to think about the managing all of those different projects and when the fruit is ripening, etc. Presumably, where is it all made then? If it's all coming from those different parts, well, where is like the central place where those wines actually come together?
Yeah, Signorello and S are made together, kind of together in the same facility. I mean, as I mentioned, the winery burned down, so we've used a contract facility for the last few years, but we'll be moving into our own estate, new winery here at the end of 23, and we'll be making S as well as Signorello there. Trim and Edge are made at another facility and outside of our facility because they're much bigger volumes. We're talking Edge is, say, 15,000 cases a year, and Edge, the combined two, is about 15,000. So the different kind of facilities that you needs. Signorello is more kind of very custom, I think if you're using restaurants as reference points, Signorello is very much like the high-end small restaurant that's got a chef-driven team and all that. And then the other ones are a little more larger type of restaurant facility where you're serving say 150, 200 customers a night, and it's the same philosophy. You need different kinds of equipment and different needs, but overseen by my team, by Priyanka, oversees all of this. So, she's busy because she acts as vineyard manager on top of it with Steve Mathiasen. So, we do everything in-house at Signorello. We've got our own team. We don't contract for vineyard work, and we don't contract for winery workers. It's all in-house. With the other two, Trim and Edge, we do have help with that outside the winery.
Yeah, it's also where my mind also goes, Ray, is, I've just very recently seen the Silicon Valley Bank, State of the U.S. Wine industry report, which, came out earlier this month. And, they, I think for the second or third year now, have reported that there's real challenges at that kind of under $15 price bracket, that actually, it's a lot more competitive because I think at that price, you have other options, and you have beer, you have cider, you have increasingly now abstinence as well, and it can be a challenge to kind of get people to come through and to maybe start their drinking career, and in the wines at that sort of under $15 or around $15 have typically been that on ramp for people, and I'd just love to get your sense of that, starting these new brands, is it, what are the ways, and how are you getting that message through to people to try this and to get into the wine world through those wines that you're making?
Well, Trim at 12 to 14, is a kind of a value category. I think the big difference with us is we're one of the few, if any, making a wine like that with a team that makes multi-$100 bottles of wine. I mean, it's quite rare to do that. And so that is one, but also the philosophy of no sugar, concentrate. We're dry on our Chard and Cab at $12 retail. And there's almost no wines at $12 to $14 retail that are coming from my region that are dry. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And we've gone down that road because personally, I don't want to drink wines with sugar in them, Cabernets at least, and Chardonnays. I mean, I get a port or Sauterne, a dessert wine, but we're not talking dessert wines here. And that's been a big change in our world, is especially but it leaks into the more expensive wines too. But at the value driven end of it, it seems that just the program has put a bunch of sugar in it because that's what people want. And it makes the wine, lush and kind of upfront pleasant, and makes up for maybe the quality of the grapes that isn't that good. So we've taken it a step further. And I know in Europe, they're starting this whole ingredients labeling thing. So it's a perfect time for me because about a year and a half ago, I made the decision to do that. And our new wines state the facts, what's in it, the sugar levels, in this case, basically no sugar because we're not adding anything and we're fermenting dry. But we're really trying to go to that length. We started with trim. So the back label's got all of those lists, calorie count, sugar, all of it. And I know, again, in Europe, they've just mandated this as truth in labeling, and they're going to come up with some ingredients lists on the back labels. That's going to be, law. And the U.S. hasn't quite got there yet, but, it started in our food industry here, and that you go to fast food restaurants and they put calorie counts on the boards and whatnot. Well, now it's people are starting to think about it in terms of wine. And I'm a big fan of this for my wines because they don't have all the stuff in it. And other people can't probably, when they put the stuff in their labels, it's going to make their wine stick out as wines that got sugar in it. When I travel to Europe and some of these regions, and even in the US and Canada and whatnot, I hear people going like, yeah, what's going on in California? There's too much sugar in some of the wines, especially at the low end. And I'm like, I want to drink something else that doesn't have sugar. And I'm like, hey, I'm the guy that's doing that. I'm making a wine. So it gives us an opportunity to sell what we're doing that's a little different than some of the other stuff that's out there.
Yeah, this is, I think, judging from the people I follow on Twitter, that's a huge topic, and I totally agree. I think that some of the things that I'm picking up there is that of course price is important. Everybody I think is is feeling the pinch in so many areas of life nowadays. But I think that. I think you hit the nail on the head, though. It's like, if you spend whatever you spend on a beverage, you want to enjoy it. Be that beer, be that mezcal, be that water, and certainly if you're investing $15 of your hard-earned money into getting a bottle of wine, then you're going to want it to taste good. You're not going to want to have that experience ruined by a sort of a low quality. And I think, again, to your point, maybe it will be those labeling laws that kind of force wineries to kind of, show their hand. And, I know there's been, a lot of pushback in the wine community about, kind of clean wine marketing. And I think some of the, the sort of low carb and it's like, okay, those guys, they know marketing, But really, ultimately, it's about transparency. It's like, okay, people who are on certain diets or are trying to watch their carbs and watch their weight, they're going to want to know how many carbs are in something or how many calories are in something. And in a lot of instances, we're not doing that badly. It's like, but even if we are, then maybe that will keep some of those people accountable as well.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's an evolution, we're working through it. And I look forward to, as you say, more transparency. And, I know what I want to do. And I've got a team that executes at the very high end that is using their talents to make very, affordable wines. And And we're proud of that, really proud of that, to be able to do that. Because, I think somebody at $14 or $12 a bottle deserves to have some options that aren't full of 14 grams of sugar in them and are just dry red wine or dry Chardonnay. And, it's hard to see, you go to the grocery store, the wines don't tell you that. But ultimately, if you go and travel a bit, like in Canada, they make all the wines go through a lab and get assayed for sugar content, amongst other things. And then that is on the label. You have to put that on the label on the shelves. And so somebody going into a liquor store in Quebec or sees the sugar content of the wine. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing, because I went there and I was shocked. I sat there, I looked at 50 wines, and they all had between 8 and 16 grams of sugar in them. And I'm like, wow, is this really happening? Because I thought it was much less, but percentage-wise, all the wines they had on the shelf, it was like 80% of the wines on the shelf had that much sugar.
Yeah, and maybe just in closing on this point as well, my mind goes straight across to the no and low alcohol category, and I don't know if you've seen the predictions and the projections for the vast size of this, and it's just I've spoken to people who are basically behind and really at the forefront of this movement in the UK, and they they tell tales of, okay, if you used to go to a pub and you were with your friends or in a restaurant and you didn't want to drink alcohol, it was like, oh, you have Coca-Cola or a fizzy drink and maybe a sweet kind of juice or something. There was no creativity, there was no thought about what might you want to have that's exciting and comes in a cool can and looks good on the table, and it's just creativity that I think maybe accountability will force the creativity at that end of the wine market, and hopefully that then is a kind of a virtuous circle that does bring more people in as they try wines and actually have a positive experience rather than a less than positive experience. So, Ray, it's been really fascinating, and each conversation that I've had has been so different. So, thanks for really going with the flow and having this honest conversation. But I think sitting as we are here at the end of January 2023, and we look ahead, I think that the big the kind of looming event that's on the horizon for all of the guests really in this series is the Premier Napa auction, and I think I really have just discovered it myself, and I think this would be a great way to bring in those of my listeners who are as well discovering it through this series. What is Premier Napa for you, and what does that mean in terms of winemaking, and how the team has gotten behind what you're putting forward into the auction in 2023?
Okay, yeah. Premier Napa is a trade event. It's geared for the trade, and it's been going on for many years. Some of the listeners might know Hospice de Beaune, and there's that could be a similar event over in Burgundy, in that we take each winery creates, if they choose. Not every winery participates every year, but typically about 200 wineries participate. And they create one-off barrels of wine, the ultimate expression of their property. And it could be Cabernet, it could be Merlot, it could be a white wine, it could be a lot of different things. And they have the option of offering either a 5-case, a 10-case, or a 20-case lot of that wine, and it goes as a whole lot. And the participants get to try these wines before and taste them as barrel samples. They're all barreled wines, and then make a decision. And then there's an auction, and it's a way of showcasing Napa Valley, all the diversity of Napa, the great wine makers and vineyards of Napa, and the buyers tend to be restaurateurs, retailers, distributors from around the world. There's people that attend, also can bid virtually. That's somewhat new since COVID. They started that whole side of it. And you can bid. You get samples sent to you, and you can bid on the wines, and then eventually you get them. It's because they're still in the barrel, so they show up anywhere from a year, 6 months, a year, 2 years after the fact. And some distributors buy them to showcase the brand that they represent that's behind it, and support that brand. Sometimes retailers create a group of customers of the retailer might go in together to buy a barrel of wine, and then restaurants buy it and put it on their wine list. So they're labeled differently than their standard edition. They're called Premier Napa wines. They have their own special labels. We are the actual chair this year. So Priyanka French and Signorello Estate are chairing this year. Every year there's a new chair, and we're chairing Premier Napa this year. And it's coming up. It's towards the end of February. So it's just really about a month away.
Okay, brilliant. And again, it will sort of flow on from that. But yeah, could you maybe just take us in a little bit, what it means to chair, and a little insight to how the preparations are going, I guess.
I guess it means a lot of work. Yeah. So, it's every year there's a new chair, and you kind of spearhead the whole effort of Napa, both on the public relations side, and get out and talk about it and create enthusiasm for it. Obviously, that's a very important part of it all. And there's steering committees behind all this, but there's just a lot of moving parts. And it's exciting for us as a winery that burned down in 2017. Our new winery coming to market here at the end of the year. It's just exciting. It's kind of for me personally, it's kind of like a coming out party for us, and that we not only get to show a barrel of wine. We're lot one. As the chair, you always have lot one, and this is really a collaboration between Priyanka and Steve Mathiasen and Celia Welsh. The three of them together have created a barrel of Signorello wine that we feel it's the best wine that we've ever produced, and a pretty cool offering. So that's what we're doing personally, and then Priyanka's been really busy with all the bits and pieces, and there's a lot of press coming to Napa and the trade, and there's a lot of hosting, and obviously Priyanka and I and the team will be really just doing all that and showing people what Napa is all about, because in a lot of cases people haven't been to Napa in a while because of COVID. The last couple of years it's been pretty quiet with COVID, and we're kind of fully out of that world, and it's back to hosting and traveling and getting people to come back, and so it's an exciting time, just the whole thing. It really is, and we're excited to been picked to be chair for this 2023 version.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Ray Signorello of Signorello Estate. Do be sure to visit signorelloestate.com, where you can learn more about the project and find their main social media handles. Do help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/492. You can also find links to all episodes from the series in the description below. And I'd absolutely love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on the Interpreting Wine Napa Valley special series in episode 493, I'll be speaking with Steve Mathiasen. Make sure you're subscribed to Interpreting Wine Podcast to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.